Hello and welcome to The View. Thank you for joining us. I'm Barbara Serra. The View is a regular panel-based discussion program from the Radicalisation Awareness Network. Our panel for this program is an experienced and knowledgeable cast of EU member state representatives and practitioners to discuss the turbulent year just gone and, crucially, what to expect in 2021. Today, we'll be looking at how the violent extreme right wing is turning to cookery programs, of all things, and video gamer chat rooms to target new audiences, and growing concerns about how the mental health crisis that we have seen develop during the COVID lockdown could impact the work of CVE practitioners in 2021. Well, let's begin by meeting our panel. They are Magnus Ranstorp from the Swedish Defence University. Welcome. Rositsa Jekova from the Center for the Study of Democracy, based in Bulgaria. Haris Pusep, Head of Bureau at the Estonian Internal Security Service, and Duncan Vella from the Ministry for Home Affairs, National Security and Law Enforcement in Malta. Thank you all so much for joining us here on The View. I'd just like to start very briefly by asking you how you think that the events of 2020 have impacted on the ability across Europe to fight against and prevent radicalization. And Magnus, I want to start with you.
Well, first of all, it's been really difficult to know what's going on. Most of the people, of course, have been in lockdown. And how do you gauge the thermometer of the state of what's happening in terms of extremism?
Rositsa, so the truth is that we don't even really know how bad it is.
To me, really, the year has created like a perfect storm for far-right extremism to flourish, and that's because we have seen some really damaging effects of conspiracy theorists coming in and providing an entry point for otherwise marginal far-right extremist ideas. And this has done a lot of damages that will need some time to correct in the future.
Duncan Vella, do you think it's been a perfect storm?
Yes, definitely. As radicalization and preventing radicalization itself is already a challenge, and this year it has showed the need for us to improvise to the new realities and find new ways on how to continue with our work from a practical point of view, but also new approaches on how to counter emerging threats and trends and patterns.
Okay, well, as we can see, I mean, one threat that has definitely evolved over the last year has been the extreme violent right wing. Now, they have found new and innovative ways to reach audiences online. Professor Cynthia Miller-Idris has just published a book called Hate in the Homeland, and it describes some of the bizarre and yet apparently effective online content that the extreme right is using to reach women and young people. Now, she talked to me a little bit earlier about how white supremacists have latched on to cookery videos.
The extreme right has long had a history of using food to give guidance to women about how to raise pure kind of white supremacist households with the purity of food, organic food. It goes along with kind of homesteading and homemaking. But those prior waves of that in the 1980s and 1990s were mostly internal kind of guidance from woman to woman over newsletters that were for women. And what's happened now in the online ecosystem is a whole new set of channels that can communicate that kind of set of messaging. And it's expanded the domains through which messaging about food gets communicated. So we see YouTube cooking channels for vegan neo-Nazis in German, for example. That's, one example, not even just for women, but then there are other examples where women are getting guidance on how to make basil butter, and that's not necessarily in a neo-Nazi or white supremacist channel, but talking about European paganism and heritage and trying to go your own way and giving messages that resonates in some of the same channels. And through algorithms, women may get further down the rabbit hole by getting recommended content after that.
Cynthia Miller-Idris speaking there. So to the panelists, I mean, it sounds surprising, I guess, the cookery programs would be used in such a way, but obviously effective. Magnus Ranstorp, if I can start with you, what do you make of it? How seriously should we take this kind of change?
No, we found relatively similar things. They are really investing in podcasts and really talk radio, where also women have a role. They haven't yet in this space in the Nordic resistance movement up in the north gone down that pathway yet, but they certainly are involved in that.
Basically, there are new forms, emerging forms of digital connectiveness, and this is definitely playing a role, because what was mentioned earlier, the mainstreaming of the far right, is definitely happening through greater commercialization, through symbols, through appearing more kind of acceptable.
In Estonia, we tend to be more introvert. During the worst times of the pandemic, you were said you have to keep your distance to 2 meters. Then for Estonians, usually it's why so close? So I think the extremists are in a way also more inside their small groups. They don't come out so openly.
What we've seen is that they're trying to sort of normalize National Socialism. They're trying to sort of take the hard edges off, and they're repackaging it so you can reach the ordinary person. And they're expecting, because of the pandemic, they're going to expect mass unemployment. And that's going to make it easier for them to be able to recruit.
I find the use of food quite interesting because, of course, food is so linked to national traditions anyway, in a good way. So it's almost the twisting of that. As Magnus, as you were saying, the kind of like whitewashing, the sanitizing of the violent extreme right. Has anyone else found that in their corners?
Not particularly with food, but it does resonate. For instance, the state is failing because of COVID. People are in need of social support, so they portray themselves as saviors, providing alternative social services. And now they are also portraying themselves as saving the children from the bad state or from bad social services that want to abduct them and bring them in the hands of traffickers or pedophiles. You know, so this cleaning up of the image, making like a more positive, more going in through more accessible topics, because before that, a lot of ordinary people will say, oh, these people, this does not concern me, immigration, that much, you know. But when you start talking to these people about children or health, they say, oh, this concerns me. So I might not agree with all the rest of the things that these people say. But when it comes to children, this does concern me very much, and it's really very frightening. So I might listen to them, and that's the dangerous part of it.
Can I just come in here? I think there are. I totally agree with you. I think that they're really going super local, and they're trying to create physical spaces as well, so that they can invite people in to come and talk to them, and they can have lecture series that, you know, it shouldn't be abnormal to come and listen to these to the ideology. They will package it, and also there are other conspiracy theories that are resonating, and that is, for example, with a strong anti-Semitic overtone. You know, they are pushing these out, that there is a great sort of anti-Semitic Jewish conspiracy with the help of NATO, with Soros, etc. That is sort of creating this sort of dangerous enemy space in which they needs to be confronted.
I agree with the point raised that currently we are seeing extremist groups who are trying to exploit the grievances of the people. So we as practitioners need to be on the lookout mainly to the networks currently being built now, because those would definitely be exploited in the future for other means.
So we've definitely seen in the past year that the creation of even more echo chambers because of the pandemic. But it's not just cookery where the extreme right, the violent extreme right, has been busy. During the COVID lockdown, there have been reports of increased activity in video gamer chat rooms, especially with young people cooped up indoors during the lockdowns. Let's go back to Cynthia.
One of the things we're seeing in 2020, of course, during the pandemic and the shutdown and the move of hundreds of millions of young people globally to entirely online lives, of course, is that the extreme right is taking advantage of that to recruit at a higher rate to spread more propaganda and essentially to exploit young children online. And we're also seeing rates of child exploitation across the board go up, of course. And so this is a form of kind of grooming toward radicalization that we see happening online on online gaming platforms, where we've heard from former extremists that they target children as young as 8 on online gaming platforms to try to introduce the idea that their parents are not the authority, to give them another URL to come over to a chat room, and then gradually introduce white supremacist and extremist content to them in a manipulative way. And so this is a very vulnerable population. They're spending a lot of time online right now without sufficient warning signs being able to be caught by other adults because parents are distracted, working outside the home or working on their own computers inside the home, and there aren't enough safeguards in place to make sure that children are safe in this context.
It's absolutely shocking, isn't it, that children as young as 8 are now being targeted. Harris Puseb, what do you make of that?
Our last experience was with a 13-year-old who joined a group of far-right, I wouldn't say it's an activist, they are more than that, but it's not so much as they are a one group, but they are rather as I said, a echo chamber. They chat there, and it's really hard to reach them. So young people can only be influenced by, seriously, by their friends, and if their parents, may they be at home, they are not used to disturbing their children if they're playing.
What the right-wing extremists are doing also is that they're entering into these spaces, playing the games, and then they will shout out something extraordinarily controversial to see who reacts, and then they will peel these individuals off to have a one-on-one conversation.
We know from our previous research that young people enter really at a very young stage the internet space. And in Bulgaria, the data shows that around 50% of them came across of violent extremist content, especially far-right, in some form. And the majority of those haven't really purposefully looked for that, but they come across this content while browsing.
If you have their parents, their guardians, their educators knowledgeable about any changes in behavior, that would definitely raise concerns even with the authorities, and is there where we need to focus most.
It's exactly those that have less trust in their family and that feel kind of more isolated from their social environment, that actually turn to social media to inform themselves on important topics or to seek advice. They're much more influenced by online figures than by their family and friends, although, of course, family and friends has still very, very big impact.
Magnus, I want to go to you because you've commented recently on the question of banning a group called Nordic Resistance. So there it is. We can see the graphic there now that Sweden is considering banning this movement. You're saying it's not enough to oppose racism generally. You got to basically get down to the details. I'll ask the panel more generally afterwards just about the issue of banning these groups. But talk us through it, because of course the question always is, well, you ban it and then it goes underground, and then arguably it's even harder to monitor.
Yeah, it's a difficult topic. I mean, in fact, when I raised that quote, I came on their radar screen. I became enemy number one for them, and they have opposed me on that issue. I think Finland recently banned the Nordic resistance movement, obviously the organization will maybe go underground, but the more you make it difficult for them to operate, it's a fine balance. In Sweden, for example, the banks have been preventing them from having bank accounts, etc. And you would think that that means that they will not be able to have or generate enough money, etc. It would make it more difficult. They've gone into cryptocurrency, so they have gone into alternative modes. I mean, there is a danger if you do ban them that they say all thresholds are off the table, and then we may go even more violent. So you have to really calibrate, but it has to be on the cards to be able to debate, what will be the consequences if you ban an organization?
I think that's very important because especially in countries where governments are also very populist or leaning towards the authoritarian spectrum in terms of their rhetoric, I think that does have a real effect on lowering the psychological barrier for people to commit violence. And there are some studies from different countries showing us that. But also looking at the society as a whole, can it act as a deterrent?
At this point, we need more and more the responsibility of the social media platforms. I mean, we all know that when they pick up something they see in the internet, the algorithms keep feeding them more and more this extremist content. Then I think it's really of the utmost importance that they really keep a close eye on that. And I think that is a sphere where banning and blocking this sort of content is the only working way.
And just briefly, Duncan Vella, I saw you nod there, and you're actually from the Ministry of Home Affairs in Malta. So how do you feel about banning certain groups? What is the threshold in Malta?
If the group is breaking the law, then deterrence and intervention needs to be taken. But the most important thing here is that we need to be careful that our action is not counterproductive. I heard Magnus and the other colleagues saying that there might be other dangers with banning, and I agree with that, because if banning is not supported with counter narratives or an explanation why this is bad, and challenging the arguments which are being made by the other party, that could give rise to further engagement with the banned group, let's say.
Let's just move it on a little bit, because of course we do still find ourselves potentially at the end, but maybe in the middle still, of a pandemic, and public health, education and social welfare agencies have struggled in recent months to keep track of people at risk of being radicalized. And that is according to clinical psychologist Ivar Molmen. He is an expert on the relationship between mental health and radicalization. Molmen fears that some very vulnerable people have not had access to the clinical therapy they need to be more resilient in the face of violent extremist propaganda. He believes that as we emerge from the COVID crisis, it will take very localized outreach to repair the damage that's been done. Here's Ivar Molmen.
The effects of the COVID pandemic has given me two big concerns. One is that the resources of our agencies are severely strained. Their ability to monitor and detect vulnerable individuals have been decreased. And we know that the individuals are in need of help and therapy, but we do not know the scale of the problem. So in the coming year, I expect actually to know less than we did last year. And I'm very concerned of this increasing uncertainty.
Magnus Ranstorp, this link between mental health and radicalization, and of course the fact that a lot of people may have fallen through the cracks in the past few months because of the pressures on the health services.
Yeah, I mean, it's just a matter of fact that the health service and the mental health service is really struggling. This is having an effect, of course, on the ordinary population. They are struggling, particularly living in isolation, etc. But gauging the mental well-being and the state of individuals who are already vulnerable is a much more difficult task. And I think we may see as the COVID situation may ease up a bit. We are through the second wave. That we may see some negative consequences of that once things are starting to get back to normal.
I think we are already seeing very kind of negative consequences. I've seen some recent data that under the UK Prevent program, referrals for potentially people at risk of radicalization have dropped by 50%, which is very substantial. But also that goes for all kinds of support services. We have in Bulgaria seen, and not only there is data that support for children victims of violence or for victims of gender-based violence are not working properly. So I think what is needed here is for not only practitioners that work on countering violent extremism and providing such services to kind of rethink their approach, but also regular practitioners to be aware of the risk pertaining to radicalization much more so that they can incorporate such work in their everyday practices.
And we need to take note of this. And our prevent work in the coming days and weeks should be guided by this premise.
We're almost at the end of the program, so just a very quick round, the same question to all of you. What do you think are the biggest challenges for 2021?
What we all know that extremist views tend to feed each other, and we know already from some time ago that Islamistic propaganda has been telling its followers to commit something in their own homeland. So if something like that happens, that also feeds the right wing, and then the ball goes back to others. So it's not really that good if we are not able to travel. There may be some plus points there, but still we have to be aware that it also have negative consequences.
I think the biggest challenge is for practitioners and everybody really that's involved in work related to preventing, countering violent extremism is to kind of upscale their efforts, because right now there is a disproportion between the mobilization of far-right extremist ideas and groups in the online space, which is not met by the same effort on the other side. So that's the challenge, to build the appropriate infrastructures where this will become possible.
I think we're going to see more waves of the pandemic. So, it will be, shutting down, opening up, shutting down. And of course, on the good side is that may restrict travel for some of for example, the religious extremists who may travel out to conflict zones, etc. But on the negative side, you will have consequences in terms of a rise in far right activity. You will see new forms. Reactions. So you have left-wing extremism, you have ecofascism, you're seeing new forms of alliances that are being formed solely online so far. That is worrying.
I'd like to thank our guests for their time and their insight. Magnus Ranstorp, Rositza Jakova, Harris Pusep, and Duncan Vella. Thank you so much. Thank you. And I hope you feel more prepared for the threats that will emerge in 2021 as we come out of this period of COVID lockdowns. Thank you for joining us. This has been The View, brought to you by the Radicalisation Awareness Network. And until our next episode, that's goodbye for now.